This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to Believe in People, a British podcast award-winning series about all things addiction, recovery and stigma. My name is Matthew Butler and I'm your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. Today I'm with Andre, who shares his powerful life story, discussing his experience of spending 31 years in a Los Angeles prison after being convicted of murder during an armed robbery. Andre reflects on the emotional turmoil that led him to commit the crime, particularly the grief of losing his child and struggling with addiction. He speaks about the harsh realities of American prison life, including gang violence, racism, and systematic corruption. Throughout this conversation, he describes the turning point in his life when he sought redemption through spirituality and rehabilitation, and, after finally being granted parole, Andre has worked to rebuild his life, focusing on music, personal growth, and his mission to help others still in the prison system. This story is one of transformational, personal accountability, and Andre's ongoing journey to find freedom, both mentally and physically, after decades of incarceration. Andre,
yes.
Thank you so much for coming on the Believe in People podcast.
Thank you.
I've invited you on because I think you have a very unique experience and a very unique story to share. And the big part of that story is, I understand you spent 31 years in prison.
Yes, I did.
Which is... Well, I'm 33 years old, so it's almost my entire life that you have spent in prison, which is insane. So, talk me through a little bit about, because obviously you're American.
Yes.
Whereabouts in America are you from?
Los Angeles.
So
even though I was born in East London.
Okay, so yeah, there's the connections there then. So,
yes.
This crime, 31 years in prison. Talk me through a little bit about what the crime was, why you committed the crime, and I guess who was affected by it.
Okay. The crime was murder. Murder, robbery, which I was charged for. It happened right around the corner from my house. The answers on why I committed it is not really an excuse, right? Because I understand now it's choices that we make and the mindsets where we are at the time. But 7 days prior to me committing the offense, I lost my third child. And it really ultimately took me over the edge. And at that time, I was probably at my lowest point because, say, a month before that, I just got discharged from the military. So at that particular time, when I was at my low, I thought having a child like my previous two would have been the best thing for me. But actually it wasn't, because when she had a surgical miscarriage, that almost took me over the top. So I didn't deal with any of my addiction issues prior to that, whether it was alcohol, marijuana, stress and things like that. So actually I was just looking for more money to get a high or to get a drink to mitigate how I was feeling at the time. So at that time, everything is impulsive. I went home, thought I donned a camouflage, so to speak. Went to a store right around the corner thinking, okay, if I just go in there, point the gun at him, typical criminal mind thinking that everything would have went smooth, because my intention was just go in there and take the money, not caring about anybody else. But I panicked, that's the truth. I panicked, discharged the weapon, ended up killing the owner actually, so, and that was probably, say, 3 weeks after, everything happened. So next thing I know, I'm in court facing the death penalty actually, because the way things are structured in America, especially the laws, if one felony happened in the course of another, automatically it's the death penalty. So it doesn't matter if it was accidental. They don't really look into that. Right at the time, it was just a crime. So to who it affected, as I know now, not just my family, but theirs. Everybody who lived in the area that knew him or knew of him. That knew of me and my family, because we lived over there. We left London in 1977, so we've been living in Los Angeles for since 1980 in that particular house where we live. So everybody knew our family, everybody knew me. So it was quite a shock to the community. But it wasn't until I was in prison with a life without parole sentence that I actually had time to look back and look at who did I affect actually. By me, one, making a decision to go into a store, have the audacity to want to take what they worked hard for, just to suppress what I was feeling at the time. But it actually cost me 31 years of my life. Yeah.
What was that like to hear? I'm just conscious of the beads as well with the microphone.
Okay,
but yeah,
sorry.
just trying. Yeah, is that okay? what was that like at such a young age to be given a life sentence? Because in America, life means life. You know, we hear over here in the UK, when you're given a life sentence, it's don't get me wrong, it is a big portion of your life, 20 to 25 years, I believe it is. Whereas over there in America, life is life. What was that like to be at such a young age and be told, okay, you're spending the rest of your life in prison?
At that time, it didn't really compute.
No.
Because when I got sent, I actually got found guilty by one judge, sentenced by another. But I remember sitting there coming to sentencing day and listening to how the judge was speaking to me like I was the biggest gangster of town. I'm looking around like, are you speaking about me? But actually, when they handed down the sentence, life without the possibility of parole, it really didn't register that meant, okay, you're never getting out of prison. You're going to die in prison. So that processing didn't even set in. Even when I actually went to my first, what they call a reception center, knowing that, okay, you're not going to get out, I didn't really have time to think about that, because once you go into a prison in America, you have to worry about the racism, you have to worry about the violence, you have to worry about all these other things. So it really didn't set in, but nor did I ever resolve that I was going to die in prison, didn't know how it was going to work out or whatnot. But hearing that, knowing that, it was pretty traumatic for me.
How long had you been in prison before it actually settled in of, okay, I'm here for life then? How long had you been there before that real, you said you didn't compute at the time.
Right.
At what point did that realization set in and think, fuck, this is it for me now? This is...
Probably like 10 years afterwards.
That's a long time for that to settle in.
10, 15 years.
Yeah.
Because up until that point, the time I went into prison, there was a lot of racial rises. There was a lot of other things to distract me of thinking about, okay, I'm not going to get out of prison, or an alternative to why. But around the 15th year, 14th year, when I started making my own transition, every other law, you've seen everybody leave to go home. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go through that process because I have this lifetime. So just living in that state, knowing that, okay, you see people going home or intervening law happen, it's not going to affect me. It's something, it's weighty to live with. Because while you're in prison, you still have to maintain some quality of life, even though okay, I don't know when I'm going home. So that's the difference between some people that go to prison, they might give up, then they fall into everything else, but you have those who hold on to some type of hope, which kind of like balanced everything else. But it was still tough.
I can imagine, but in one of your earlier answers, you talked about the violence in prison, the racism in prison. What was prison life like then? And I imagine your experiences would be much different to what it'd be like in a British prison as well. Talk me a little bit through prison life, and if there's anything that you can think of that is, I guess, exclusive to being in an American prison as well.
Prison life in America, one, you have to deal with gangs, racism, and corruption, whether it's coming from the internal corruption, meaning from the offenders or the staff. There's a point in between where you do have fun in prison because you might meet friends, people they do have sports, but just the constant threat of violence because of the racial tension, and the racial tension is only because of skin color, right? Nothing actually genuine. So living in that constant pressurized environment, it really takes a toll out of you. So learning what not to say, where to go, how to negotiate things, how to protect yourself. These are the things I had to learn at a very young age, because when I went to prison in 1992, I was one of the youngest people. Everybody else either was served already 15, 20 years. And there was a different type of environment, because you had to deal with people getting killed on the yard or they're shot by the guards. So it's that constant threat of violence or uncertainty. So just dealing with that on its own is enough.
How does it compare, I think, in terms of what we see in mainstream media? American life often in places like LA has this depiction of gang culture, and obviously there is racism in America is really brought to the forefront of the media attention, especially in the case like the George Floyd case that happened, a couple of years ago. How does the sort of the racism and the gang culture on the outside compare to what is in the inside? Is there a parallel between the two? Is it similar or is it different? I mean, I don't know if you're experiencing your life before prison that feeling of worry, of violence, and in the way that you did when you was in prison.
Right.
Is the similarities between the two?
The similarities are usually the people that's in prison as gang members were gang members before. But now there's an element of prison that adds to confinement. So you have prison gangs. Most of the shot callers, as we say, people who control the gangs or have the say-so are in prison. They have a particular prison in Corcoran, Pelican Bay that have what they call SHU, segregated housing units. And that's usually where they send the gang leaders. However, from their cells or wherever they are, whatever happens in prison mainly happens on the street. So if there's, say, a rival gang war in prison, it usually trickles to the street. Conversely, if a peace treaty was formed in prison, usually it'll trickle into the street. So there's always a similarity and a connection, you know. But even in that situation, it can get very bad, you know, because it's more, you're dealing with more confinement, you're dealing with more at stake. On the street, you can leave. Even if there's a warfare, even if there's racial discrimination, but in prison, everything is there. So imagine there's a war between the blacks or the whites or whatever. You know when that door opens, either you're going to have to fight for your life, stay in the cell, which also comes with a consequence. So you have all these variables with the gangs and, you know, protection and bullying and money. So there's a lot of factors between prison and the streets. You know, especially if, say, for example, a gang leader in prison tells somebody on the street to do something, right? And in that lifestyle, either prison or death is the outcome. So 9 times out of 10, if they don't follow orders from prison on the street and they come to an institution, then they have to worry about that. So that's the similarities, and that's the connections from prison.
Is the gang culture, you know, my only resource is mainstream media, but I've seen it in TV shows where, like, black people stay together, white people stay together, the Mexicans stay together. And, like, the second you come into prison, whether you know these people or not, it's right, they're your people. Whether you get along with them or not, they're the ones that you stick with. Is that the reality of prison? Was that very much your experience?
That's very much the reality, especially in higher levels like level 4, level 3. The lower you come down in levels, the less segregation that you have. It might be some elements of it, but not as much, because that's one of the things that transition in from incarceration into freedom, even over here in the UK, being in close proximities with different races. Being in prison for so long, like I was sharing with a couple of people, if somebody from another race approached me or a group of blacks, they're only coming for 2 reasons: to do you something or to do some type of illicit transaction dealing with drugs, etc. Where would it be? So in prison, you know that's the situation, but dealing with it mentally and emotionally out here in the free world, it's similar because of the amount of time that I did, you know. So yes, there is segregation, but the length of time that I did and the ups and lows, even that's superficial, because when we really need each other, we bond with each other. So all the segregation, this is your bench, this is that, that's the similarities of the streets too. But there's times when all that facade, you know, decreases.
Talking about, like, you know, then you mentioned about, like, the drugs and things like that is... I think from an outside perspective, it was I guess quite naive of me to believe that, okay, they're in prison. Do you know, I mean, do you know how hard it is to get things in and out of prison? Seems to be, again, something that is put forward as being difficult, yet you often hear stories about how much drug use is going on in prisons. Talk me through that then. How do drugs end up in prison, and how are they distributed amongst inmates within prison as well?
Drugs can come in through visiting. When I first started my time, our families could send us boxes, you know, with food, et cetera, et cetera. People who use that avenue for drugs. When that got shut down, people who come to visit you, they'll bring you and exchange you drugs, or guards. So usually it was just an opportunity. If somebody saw an opportunity to get drugs in because the price is so inflated, they'll get it in. Distribution now, it could be either through inmates. You know, the people that you know who you sleeping next to, or you know the person down the landing, you know what they use the same, similar to the people on the streets. Everything is available in prison, from spice, heroin, marijuana, etc. So the availability of it is just like on the streets here. If you know somebody who has it or know somebody who might know it, just a conversation.
How are drugs paid for within prison then? Because not people don't necessarily have the access to the money that they have in the free world. How are they paying for these substances to be able to use them personally?
You'll be amazed.
Yeah, I would be too. I mean, go on, tell me.
Prison.
Yeah.
Because just like how drugs come in, people used to get in SIM cards for phones, cash, because the currency exchange, if somebody wanted drugs and they had cash, they would get more. But things like e-commerce, whether they had a thing called PayPal. He's somebody for PayPal, MoneyGram, etc. Or if you have canteen in your cell and somebody's selling something for $30, the equivalent, you'll go in your cell and get $30 equivalent and just give it to them. So the transaction is similar to the streets, and it's whether it's a small quantity or large. Large quantities is where you see like corruption between staff because they're the only people who have the ability to bring in that amount. Yeah. So it's almost like a working relationship, so to speak, between the staff and the inmates. But it's still a problem because in prison, yes, you have an easy access to drugs, but so do overdoses. Yeah. It's a lot of overdoses. It's a lot of synthetic drugs that come through prison, which leads to death. And that's also one of the main things that leads to riots and violence and things in prison. How are the drugs consumed? Because I mean, there's some drugs take cocaine as an example. All you need is to do is just take a sniff. Right. With some drugs, obviously, you need an amount, I guess, equipment, paraphernalia to actually use those substances. How are some of those other substances like heroin actually consumed then? I mean, is it a case of just rubbing it into the gums, or are people actually injecting it, smoking? The same way they use it out here. So how are they getting access to like that equipment as well then, like the needles and stuff? Because it must be a little bit harder to get in than a little bag of brown sort of thing, do you know? Not necessarily, because if you figure there's nurses' stations, there's medical. There's people who take insulin for shots or whatnot. So you might have an inmate working in the nurses' station, and they might have easy access to syringe. Wow. So it's either money exchange for drugs. So it's access to everything as far as usage. There's fire. There's any equipment that you need. So, yes. What were some of the, I guess, interesting enough, you've been in prison for a very long time, 31 years. Can you tell me what the worst thing that you saw in prison was? The worst thing I've seen, wow. Okay, even give me a few examples. Yeah, a few examples. I mean, I can't. You've talked then about like deaths, overdoses, things like that. Do you know? Because I've seen films where people are getting like, fucking stabbed in the toilets and shit like that. Do you know? And I always think, oh well, this is the media, but going back to it, these are obviously based on some realities as well. Right. So what is the actual reality? Do you know? I mean, I don't know if you've seen films like Shawshank Redemption is a classic one. Do you know where this sort of stuff goes on? But what's some of the worst things that you've seen personally? I mean, the first day I got to prison, there was an altercation, a racial altercation that had been long-standing for a while. So I get to the yard, and they had an alarm, which means something is happening. And I seen a gurney run towards the building. And when I see them coming back, you had a nurse on top of the gurney giving somebody CPR. And that was, for me, my first time, and that person ended up dying. I've seen a stage fight on one side of the yard, and I seen somebody get the shirt pulled over him, and two guys were just stabbing him. And that was traumatic to see, because when you see something like that, somebody actually helpless, and you know that they're going to kill this person. I've seen people get raped. I've seen a person get violated in certain ways only because they might not be part of a gang. They might not have the courage to stand up for themselves. I've seen a lot of people get taken advantage of. I've seen a person get their throat cut at the fence talking to someone, thinking that they're just negotiating something that happened, but they've already plotted to kill this person. So the range of horrible things that I've witnessed includes rape to murder. Did you ever think that you would die in prison based on the things that you were seeing around you? No. No? How come? After seeing those things that was happening, why did that thought never come into your head of, this could be me, I could get stabbed, I could be raped, all these things. What made you feel as though you were safe? Because I know I wouldn't let it happen to me. And this is probably something that most people don't know. Most people in prison where they might be indicated as the most violent, they're just like you and me. People that either been institutionalized and they've become savage because of the factors of prison. And it's mostly peer pressure. As a youth, that was probably my vice, being peer pressured, trying to fit in with everybody. And I knew the consequences of that probably my first year fighting my case. So when I went to prison, there's a few things that I made resolve to. Never be bullied, never follow a crowd, never do what everybody else says is okay, and just stand up and speak for myself. And that right there kind of like nips a lot of things in the bud that might open the door to get raped, to get taken advantage of, because prison is a breeding ground for predators. But if you allow yourself to be that, and I didn't allow it. So all those things about getting stabbed, getting raped and whatnot, I didn't put myself in those type of situations in prison.
Does that not in some way make you a target because you are going against the system and the way things are being done there? Like, I'd have thought, okay, this guy ain't playing ball here. This guy's standing up for himself. Like, fuck that. We don't have that here. Do you know?
Not really.
No, completely
Depends
opposite.
who you are,
Really.
because I think that was one of the benefits. When I went to prison, I was a known gang member, even though I was young. So in prison, my first probably 5 years, I had a gang-related altercation. So slamming out on the streets. If somebody knows that you're not to be messed with, usually that'll set your pace for your time, your duration in prison, no matter how long you've been in prison. You know, so it doesn't matter what anybody else had to say. I've been through that. I know the consequences of that. So that really wasn't a factor for me after I went to prison. So it wouldn't matter what anybody said or how they felt, even me, not disassociating myself from my gang, but making a defining line. Okay, I'm not a gang member. You guys are my tribe. I'm going to be that person you can talk to or rely on that I wish I had, right? So usually when that's known, everybody else, they just does everything else. But there's always that static factor of, yes, somebody's going to say something or have something to say, you know, but it was just a matter for me just having that internal courage, that internal resolve, and drawing that line, be like, no, this isn't going to happen.
How did you sort of distance yourself from, you know, you said when you went into prison, you was part of a gang, and then over time you've kind of distanced yourself from that. What was that like? And was it easy to distance yourself from it? Or did you experience some resistance in that?
It was easy because I know what I wanted. The only tug that I did feel, it was people who I met while in prison that I knew from the streets, and we had like a childhood relationship. Yeah. So they felt that I was leaving the gang of personal reasons. So it was more of they felt that I was leaving them. But I was to the point where it doesn't matter how you feel. You could not like it, you could like it or whatnot. You can ask me, why did I choose to mature, right? And that's one of the things in prison, because I'm Muslim. A lot of people think when you become Muslim or any other faith or change your life, you have to leave the people who you grew up with. For me, it was more just leaving the lifestyle of a gang member, the criminal activity, the unhealthy lifestyle, the value system, the predatory nature. But when I looked at the people who were gang members, I'm looking at people who I used to live next door to. Somebody else's son that might need guidance or be in a worse situation off than me. So it really wasn't so much disassociating myself from people. It was disassociating myself from the lifestyle. Because at that point, I already realized the lifestyle got me life in prison. The lifestyle played a part in getting me losing 3 of my kids, right? The lifestyle got me discharged from the military. The lifestyle ruined my whole sports career. The lifestyle did a whole lot of these things. So I had this pre-knowledge going into prison. So being set on my discipline, it wasn't as hard as others might experience. Like going to one of their fellow gang members, be like, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I've seen people get stabbed for that.
That's what I was
Blood in,
thinking, you
blood
know.
out.
Yeah, exactly. Blood in,
Yes.
blood out. That is exactly what I was thinking. So it's quite interesting that you was able to do that. And you mentioned there about religion as well. Was the Muslim faith something that you found whilst you was in prison? Was it
Yes.
something that you had before? So you found that in prison?
I grew up in Catholic school. My mother's Seventh-day Adventist. So I always had that religious / spiritual presence in the house, but it didn't relate to me. When I was facing the death penalty, I remember in the county jail, same time Rodney King rise was happening. Imagine being 20 years old. The only thing you have in your head, okay, death penalty, death penalty, death penalty. I remember very poignantly getting on my knees and be like, oh God, if you just get me out of this. Just this last time, which was quite a familiar state with me because I've been in some very precarious situations, shootouts, near-death experiences, etc. But this situation was kind of different because I knew this wasn't one I could either lie myself out of, manipulate the results to get up out of. So I found myself on my knees crying, be like, God, please just get me up out of this situation. So at that time, it wasn't so much that I was identifying with a religion. I just needed that type of help that I knew I was in a bad situation. So from there, it just came with going to church, praying, reading, etc. Long story short, going into prison, one of my friends actually was an enemy on the street, rival gang member. He was a Muslim. He introduced me to come to Juma one day, and I bended off like, no, I'm cool. I remember my dad sent me a Quran. Early days in prison, he was like, you know what's going on with the Muslims? I was like, same thing as with the Crips. You know, because you see, even with the Muslims or anybody who has a religious body in there, the same things, whether it be racism, arrogance, et cetera, because everybody finds their way. But me, because my need was so sincere, so was my quest, you know, for spirituality, because I know I needed some type of help. So it was almost like a progressive stage thing. And Islam, I chose Islam because it actually just gave me all the answers to the questions that I have, not to the point where I thought Islam was better than Christianity or this was better than that. That's not how I came into my spiritual awareness or place in Islam. It was just a gradual thing of one education. It made the most sense to me. And through my experience, whether it was through the military, gangs, and that regimented lifestyle, it gave me an order. You know, it gave me a purpose. And the first thing in Islam that I learned from my best friend was how to purify the way that I thought, the way I processed my feelings. Because in essence, that's how I responded in life. That's how I was going to live my life, regardless of who I said I was. You know, the way I processed emotions was all backwards. From the time I can remember all the way up to I went to prison, I've been through so many emotional ups and downs, get kicked out of 5 grades and 1 grade level, you know, being bullied and all this, you know. So Islam gave me a good benchmark on how to deal with all of these things, you know.
Did it put you in, you know, going back to the whole, the groups within prison, you know, we spoke about the blacks, whites, Mexicans. In this country specifically, I think Muslims probably receive some of the most racism in this country. Did that put you in like 2 separate camps of being black and being Muslim as well? Or was it still just one sort of identity within the prison of being with black people?
It was double. Because one, you're not looked at favorably in prison as being black. We all looked at the problem demographic. Yeah. Which in some respects we are. Additionally, being Muslim, double the bad image because most of the correctional officers in the CDC are either military, active military, and law enforcement. And we know about 9/11. Yeah. So that was an added pressure, you know, so yes.
That's understandable. Talk me through some of the corruption that you may have experienced, because based on what you've told me so far, corruption seems to be rife within prison anyway. And it's another thing when we talk about culture. And there's been a story recently in the news of improper conduct by a prison officer. What sort of corruption have you experienced? You said about double the hate then, and you said around, the staff that work there.
Yeah.
Talk me through some of the corruption that you've witnessed in prison, or any corruption that you've experienced yourself being in that system.
Well, prison guards used to make bets between themselves who would win fights on a shoe yard, knowing that in their job to break up a fight, there were tears. Audible, get down. Next, warning shot, which they're not any, an actual shooting. And this is their protocol. But on one hand, they had an organization, SEAL, called the Green Wall. And what they do is like a police prison gang amongst the COs. So they would actually bet on who would win the fight, the blacks or the Mexicans, etc. And most of the time, if there's only 20 people allotted to a shoe yard, they might let out 10 Mexicans and 3 blacks, knowing the situation of who would win. And I've actually seen one time when they shot the black person after they won their bet. And that was one of the big things that got Pelican Blaze Chute closed. I've seen that corruption. I've seen the corruption to where a CO will come, a correction officer will come, tell you that they can bring in drugs, etc. They bring in the drugs, etc. And they'll turn around, raid your cell, take all your phones and all that, get all your money, another form of corruption. I've seen correctional officers bring other inmates knives, buck knives and things like that. So that level of corruption is ripe, right? Even on an administrative level, if you were to get written up by a correctional officer for something that you're actually innocent for, because they're so intertwined in protecting each other right up to the warden, all the paperwork will be legitimized as if it was okay. You have that line of corruption, which I believe before I paroled, 3 wardens got fired because a warden is the commander-in-chief of the prison. But under that, they had a thing called, I think the equivalent over here is the volcano squad. They'll come in and do whatever they want to do. I've seen them forcefully beat you up. And when I say beat you up, bones broken, hospitalization, but they'll just tuck you away, tell your family you're sick or you're out to court and these type of things. Flashlight therapy, any type of resistance, even if you're right, you'll be missing for 2 weeks.
What's flashlight therapy?
Flashlight therapy, they have flashlights about like this, the sheriffs. And they'll beat you up with it. That's what they call it, flashlight therapy.
Okay.
So a lot of police brutality back in ADSEG and the shoes. But the corruption is so interwound because you might have a nurse team assisting the SEALs because everything has to be caught on camera, CCTV. But they'll tell them you wait right there. They'll abuse whoever they have, then bring in the nurses, edit a whole lot of stuff. So the type of corruption is ripe in prison, but as an inmate, you still have to find your lane because one, you have to stay safe. You have to create and nurture a quality of living in prison because you still have education, you still have those avenues, you can still see your family, you can still do all these rehabilitative things. But to get caught in that sway of internal corruption is kind of difficult. Very difficult.
Why do you think the corruption happens? Like, why do you think police officers correctional officers, are engaging in this corruption? Why not just go do your job, maintain a level of peace in the prison and go home? How is that happening? How are they being influenced to do what they're doing?
Because a lot of them feel like we deserve to be there. A lot of correctional officers, not a high percentage of correctional officers feel you deserve to be there because after you harm someone, so they're not going to treat you the way a normal society would. You don't have any rights. So that's the mindset. Additionally, they get it in their training, right? So they come in there with that. Because sometimes they could just come into a grown man's room and say they want to do a search. They'll humiliate you, have you get stripped naked and do all these humiliating things, go through your personal stuff, only because they feel that you don't have any rights. You know, especially if it's crimes about domestic violence, murder, anything victim impacted, which prison is always victim impacted. They have that mindset. That's why you might also see on the yard, everybody knows when something is happening in prison. Any type of violence, they already know.
Yeah.
That's another point of corruption in prison. You communicate with the staff. So if somebody's going to be assaulted, they will wait until the assault is finished, then make their way over there. Because in prison, it's also a give and take thing.
Yeah.
Because as much as the staff are corrupted, the prisoners actually run the prison. Because at any day, somebody could be like, okay, we're not going inside, we're tired. The standards, whether it be eating, whether it be medical, whether it be just basic humanity and respect, anything could happen and the prison could shut down. So those are the reasons why it happens.
Who do you think the worst people are in prison? Who gets the brunt of this, corruption the worst, would you say?
Probably those who aren't affiliated with a gang or a group, individuals.
What about sexual predators, child molesters? Obviously, are they... I understand they're separated from a lot of the other people. Is that the case in the American prisons as well?
Yes.
So you wouldn't have ever come into contact with those people, and would you?
Unless they try to hide it.
Yeah.
And once it's found out, then they're pretty much dead.
Have you seen that? Have you experienced that?
Yes.
Talk me through that.
It was this one particular guy, but it was rumors that he was in there for domestic violence and child molestation. But he was a gang member.
Okay.
Right? So you have the biasness and whatnot. But it was some higher up saying that, no, if it's one rule for one, it's one for all. But what he did is he was changed all his court transcripts, everything that indicated what his actual crime was for. And they found out, I think 2 weeks later, he was doing on the weight pile. That's when they had weights before they took it. And 2 guys hit him in the head with a dumbbell.
Jeez.
And killed him.
Yeah. Well, it's straight up killed him there as soon as they found out. That's it. There is no... it's not caught, is it? Do you know what I mean? There is no, let's hear what you've got to say.
No,
once they found out what you've done, there's your sentence by. And as you've said with the CEOs, they let these things happen anyway.
Yeah.
And if they're going to judge people based on what they've done prior to coming to prison, they're not going to give a shit, are they, about a sexual predator, a child molester? They usually turn a blind eye. Yeah, of course they would.
Usually they will.
You mentioned earlier a little bit about parole.
Yes.
Now, obviously, we'll get to this, but 31 years in prison, you thought you was going to die there.
Yes.
At what point, how many times did you visit the parole board? What came about you getting parole? Talk me a little bit through that process and your experiences there, because again, it's not a case of you just see people once and they tend to let you go. It's often you have to see them time and time and time again. Was that your experience?
No, actually, I had life without parole all the way up to November 18, 2018.
Okay.
Right. What I did was I submitted a application for commutation.
What's that?
Which is the application for clemency and to shorten your sentence that goes directly to the governor. And at that time, it was Jerry Brown. He was leaving office for the second time. But all the way up and from 1992 all the way up to 2018, I had life without the possibility of parole. So any law or any other relief that affected everybody else or another designated lifer, it didn't touch what they call the condemned, meaning those on death row and those without life without parole. But on November 18, 2018, my application for commutation was granted. At that time, I'd already served 27 years. So what happened then, when my sentence was reduced to 30 years to life because I was a youth offender, which means whoever committed their crime 20 years and younger can go to the parole board because they were deemed a youth offender. So
and was that a new thing that was introduced then, or was that something that's always been the case?
It wasn't a new law because when the law came out, it only affected those who were 14 years and younger.
Okay, yeah.
2 years later, it affected those who were 17 years and younger. Like 5 years later after that, now it affected those who were 20 years and younger, irrespective of their sentence. But because mine was 30 years to life, automatically I went to the parole board 9 months later. And yeah, I thought I was ready because by that time I was already an imam. I was already a facilitator of a lot of rehabilitative groups. So I was on a good traction, had good traction. First parole board here, and I got denied 7 years. Because now what they did, every infraction that I accumulated from 1992 up until that point, they used against me, irrespective of the progress that I made along that time. So 7 years was a denial, crushed me. Really, really crushed me. They moved me to another prison, level 2 prison, which was probably my hardest time because now from general population, now I'm in a prison with child molesters, people who couldn't survive the main line. Everybody that left where I was for the longest, now I'm there in an open environment. So now I had to deal with that.
And how come what was that move for then?
Because what CDCR did, they tried to, because maybe you asked the question, what did they do with the sexual?
Yeah.
What they did, they put them on a yard called S&Y, sensitive needs yards. They segregated them. But what they did, I think 5 years prior, was take away the S&Y and call them non-designated facilities, which meant anybody can go there.
I get you now. Yeah.
And that level of corruption cost people their lives.
Yeah.
Because now you're forcing people from general population to go somewhere where if and when you go, now your name is tarnished. Now you're likely, if anybody finds out, you're likely to be killed. But now I had to spend the next how many of years rectifying what I needed to do because I know I was going back to the parole board.
Yeah.
And that was 3 years later.
Yeah.
I went, same intense questions similar to our discussion because they wanted no answers, which rightfully so. So at that hearing, they found me suitable for parole. I got parole like 9 months later, but the reason why I'm here, I went right into federal custody. So even though I left state custody, they were waiting for me in what they call reception and release. So I spent an additional 3 months waiting to see what my immigration status would have been about. And that didn't fare well because if I could have stayed, fought it because when I was in the military, to my example in incarceration, everything leading up to, it would have fared kind of weighty, but it would have took about 2 years. And I wasn't prepared to do that. So that's how I got deported.
So you got deported back here. Is that what? I thought you'd come over here by choice.
No.
I was thinking, why would you come to England by choice from LA? But so the actual deportation.
Yes.
That's interesting. You used the word earlier, institutionalized. And after 31 years, I can't imagine what it was like going from being in prison to the world. And I mean, again, I'm 33 years old. The changes that I've experienced in my lifetime that I've been able to adapt to because I'm here, I'm living it. What was that like for you coming out of prison? And I guess what was your biggest shock in terms of how the world was now to how it was before you'd gone into prison?
The world hasn't changed too much.
Really?
I think they got more rude.
Okay.
People are more disconnected, more fast-paced. I'm still transitioning because I've been out about 18 months now. So just the whole one leaving society in 1992, getting on a plane that was terrifying. So having to deal with that, but coming to a new country, not knowing anybody, that's similar to going to another prison. So that didn't really bother me.
Yeah.
What was tricky was going on public transportation, interacting with different dangers, different people, closing spaces, fast reactions, those type of things. And it's similar to when I was younger, all the external triggers and stress management, et cetera, et cetera. And that's unique probably to my story because one, I spent all those years in prison, including federal detention, to come to a new country where I have no recollection of. So the amount of stress I've experienced from the first day, it wasn't the same type of stress that I was going through when I was younger.
Yeah.
Same factors, same people, same losing a job, getting a job, et cetera, but now being able to manage it because I managed it in prison for so long. They're still there. And I think it's heightened now. I'm barely getting relaxed now being on the train.
Yeah.
Going through dark tunnels and people brushing up on you, having conversations in different forms, and just being able to walk without walking in a circle in prison. That's all you do. So I'm still adapting to society.
What was the first thing you did when you came out of prison? What was the first luxury you treat yourself to?
Pizza.
Nice. I knew it'd be something really simple,
Pizza.
but it'd be nice. Anywhere in particular, or was it just
No, because I didn't know, because I went to Paddington.
Okay, yeah.
So I didn't know anything. I just looked at the closest pizza shop, went to the hostel, which was right around the corner. It took me about an hour to get there.
Yeah.
I still couldn't use Google Maps. So it was a line of eateries. So I just went to the closest one.
Yeah.
Got something. It was wonderful.
Yeah. I imagine it could be the worst pizza in the world, but I imagine in that moment it still tasted like the best pizza in the world. I guess, what's next for you then? After 31 years in prison, 18 months on the outside now, what is next for Andre?
The next thing for me is launching my entertainment agent. Because I grew up in dancehall, I grew up in music, and that's what was the thing that I was good at before I went to prison. So quite recently, what I did after coming back from Trinidad, which I'll speak to you about, I think it's music. Putting on events, putting on shows, because that's what I'm good at. And it's another thing that is another stress factor, not being in the country for 3 years.
Yeah.
Or not having property or something in this country. A lot of opportunities got closed for me, which could be another external factor, stress, So what's for me now is launching what I call sensory seduction entertainment. It's just not about DJing. It's just not about investment. It's more about empowering the people, empowering ourselves, and actually using what I'm good at in a legal way, because like I said, I just came back from Trinidad. And one of the things that happened while I was in prison, my father passed away. And I inherited everything from him, his business, the property, et cetera. So yes, music and all these things might be at the forefront, but now, person coming out of prison, now in Trinidad, I have other siblings and other relatives where my performance, the way I respond to things, my business etiquette, et cetera, they're dependent on me now.
Yeah.
So that's the next thing for me, putting myself in a position here in London to where I could be able to, one, go back and forth to Trinidad because my mom is aging. It's a lot of factors that came into play and what's poignant for me now, as a person who used to be probably the most untrustworthy person in my family. Now to being the head of the family, my dad's only son, it's kind of surreal. But I know those type of situations is what prison actually prepared me for. So that's where I'm at now. All the minor problems, like I tried to go get a laptop the other day because when I came back from Trinidad, I dropped my rucksack on the train line. Messed up it kind of jogged up my laptop. So I said, okay, I need a new laptop. So I went to Curry's, got the MacBook Pro, I think it was the MacBook Pro M3. Everything, he had it on the table, everything. I got the price down to like $49 a month, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, okay, because I just brought a new system. Did the credit check. And the only reason I couldn't get it because I didn't have 3 years residency.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So these are before going to prison, I probably would have went home, took a drink, and did something, not knowing how to process that.
Yeah.
But now it's like, okay. So these are the things which I've been, having to adjust, and how prison has actually served as a ground for education and how I could apply it now, even over here in England. So that's the next things for me, just building that so I could be able to relieve my mother of the duties that she's doing, like the landlord duties, making sure that my family's all right, making sure that I'm economically all right, because, hey, it's bills to pay.
Absolutely, yeah.
All these things to pay.
So I understand that despite being in prison for as long as you have been, you've recently taken a job where you're going to be voluntarily going back into prison now.
Yes.
And being on the opposite end of that and helping people, as you were saying. what's the mindset after 31 years in prison to think, right, I'm going to go back now and I'm going to help people?
Right.
Talk me through that, because I can't personally. If I'd spent 31 years in prison, the last place I'd ever want to go again is prison. I think just walking around with guards and the locks on the doors and all, I'd find it really triggering after 31 years, but I suppose to you in some way, it's normal to you. That was your life for such a long time. So what reason have you wanted to go back to prison to help people?
The path of amends. I learned in prison, for me personally, stop trying to do things that you're not good at. It's one thing I learned in prison, how I got there. And through 31 years being in prison, being a part of self-help groups, creating self-help groups myself, and etc., having people come to the temple and actually teaching people, you actually find out why people came to prison and the help and the support that they need on the streets. I also know that crime is a very, very real thing, how it affects the victims, how it affects the community, that snowball. And I know that I was a major factor in both, because growing up, excellent education, sports, could have went professional in 4 sports, wanted to become a cop, wanted to do all these things, right? But because of my lifestyle, living in the streets, being attracted to certain things and not having the ability, nor the education, nor the application skill to get it, landed me in prison for a very long time. And it ultimately, it made me make a choice, whether it be a poor choice or not. Another life was lost. So I owe that in the path of amends, because I know that it just wasn't the direct victim that was affected. It was, even my family was affected. You know, people that knew him was affected. And when I was young, I didn't speak. I wasn't courageous enough to speak. I always took the back seat to everything. It's one thing in prison that I learned and became was a leader, right? So I knew in prison, one of the things that I wanted to do and was going to do was go back in prison when I got out and to help, you know, whether it be on the administrative side, whether I'll be developing rehabilitative courses for the staff to provide for the inmates, to where they can, one, change the culture within the prisons and be prepared when they get out of prisons, like different skills. And I know that, well, like you say, that's my whole lived experience. So me spending time on something else wouldn't be fruitful for me, nor is it something that I'm accountable for. So you can say it's more weighty on the side of accountability. Came up through the gangs. I learned through the gangs where best to go give your knowledge and your lived experience and your example in prison. Because that's what I've been doing. I can't go out and come get a corporate job right away because I haven't been in that field, although I have the education, right? Mine's always been, okay, I know the prison life best. I know who's in prison. I know the barriers of how they got to prison, and I know how they'd be successful post-prison. So I know that that was my role as an individual, my role as a Muslim, my role as a man, my role as an ex-gang member. Because I know you can't take somebody who hasn't lived that experience to talk to them or to talk to me, right? Because I wouldn't want to hear it. But I know that so many people I've reached in prison, so it wouldn't make sense for me to come out now and not go back and be of service, whether it be to the staff or to the inmate population. That's why I had to go back into the prisons.
I can appreciate that. I think a really good answer as well. But I guess talking about all this stuff and all these experiences that have made you who you are today, how does going back to the crime that you committed those many, many years ago, how does that still affect you today? Does it affect you today?
Yes.
Talk me through those feelings. Is there a trauma response to it? Do you relive that moment over and over? How does it? How do you cope now? How do you live now after doing what you had done?
I have to own it. Don't make excuses about it. It's humbled me. It's actually put me in a more humble position sometimes loud noises, or even if I see an Oriental person, because the person that I killed was Korean. Being in certain stores, or even getting to a certain level of desperation or stress, I always remember that. Because the duration for me going into the market and running out the market was very small. When I knew that decision at that time, where I was at, what I was relying on, that whole build-up until the gun discharged, till I pulled the trigger in panic, was all because of my inability to handle life. So yes, I remember it because I remember every single day that I spent in prison, in those cells. Because you I ask myself all the time, why are you here? How did you get here? Because I had to find those answers. Because you asked me earlier, how did you cope with being in prison? I knew that whenever that time came for me to be released, I wasn't going to be the same person. And knowing that I took an innocent man's life because of my inability to handle life was not going to happen again. So it stays in my mind. Even the circumstances I've experienced in London so far, my temper's raised. But just knowing, like, vividly, from walking in, the sound, the court proceedings, the gavel, the jury, that all that's vivid to me, similar to like me, how I felt when my girl told me our child is dead. So those traumatic things and their trauma points, people talk about trauma, I have multi-layered trauma, but these traumatic experiences and feelings and events that actually keeps me on the straight and narrow, because I know everything comes down to choice. Whether it be a bad choice or a good choice.
You said about obviously the loss of your child and going back to your youth as well. You particularly good at sports. You say you're well educated. What were the things that drew you into this lifestyle of committing crime? Because as you said, no excuses.
Right.
But there's plenty of people out there who have gone through something traumatic, such as losing a child,
Correct.
and they haven't resorted to gun violence and things like that. So what else was going on in your life building up to that moment? Was you influenced by gang culture? How was you initiated into gangs? How did you go from being this educated, and well-rounded, as you said, athlete, promising, upcoming athlete to that?
You know where it started? What the draw was? I wanted to do what everybody else was doing that my parents wouldn't let me. The belonging.
Yeah.
I seen all of them now. I became a gang member, and that's a tricky phrase. When did you become a gang member initiation? I grew up in my neighborhood. So it wasn't a matter of getting jumped in for me.
Not like an initiation phase you go through. You're just around it and kind of gravitate to it. Yeah.
But the draw was I want to be like them, because they had the girls, they had the pretty girls, everybody was around them. And at that time I didn't have that. Everything was go to school, be good, wear a uniform, everything was structured, sports practice, bam. But inside, growing up, I was so unfulfilled, didn't know who I was, or struggling to learn who I was. Excelled in sports, excelled in grades, but it wasn't enough for me. One, as the only boy. Two, I was very dark, right? So the bullying, the teasing, etc. The old phrase, if you can't beat them, join them. So it's one of those gradual things, because who you grow up, my peers who I grew up with, we all went to the same elementary. We all played sports in the same park. But these guys' older brothers or whatnot were actual gang members. So it's almost like I grew up into it. So now, rather than pay attention in school or do what my mom said or everything else, I'm ditching school to be like them. Still haven't dealt with my own issues about, man, who am I, or what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses. So I grew up in that lifestyle with them. It didn't turn criminal per se until like 86, because everything was gradual. It went from stealing and smoking my dad's marijuana joints, doing a little bit of drinking, to now the lifestyle of a gang per se is you drink every day, you loiter, you do mischief, you steal, you fight. So for me to be a part of this, I also have to participate. But the funny thing, I was never like that. Every time I'm around him, I'm more timid. I'm like, okay, he's bigger than me. But I had to put on the mask because it did give me some place where I felt that, okay, I got people that like me. I got this. By 1987, I was a full-fledged gang member. So I'm doing everything that a gang member does. Not just, I say the good things. It was different in the 80s. But now, all the vacancies and voids in me, like lack of belonging, I'll mask it with drinking and laughing and all day. My grades are declining. But hey, I'm having fun here. Learning how to deal with stress, getting kicked out of this school because I'm not doing with my grades. My parents are on me. What do? Go to the neighborhood. What are we doing? Drinking more. So as time goes on, introduction of drugs, guns, now everything is robbing, beating people up. So I lived the lifestyle. I became a gang member. So I was doing everything a gang member did. Take advantage of the weak, shooting at people, pulling guns on people. And actually that's not a good set of coping skills, you say, because for me as a gang member, the coping skills, if you don't have money, you go take it. Because that's the mentality of a gang member. Because this is my block. Doesn't matter what I was feeling inside because I've been shattered for a long time inside. Right? So that's why it's easy. That's why at that time, little obstacles were monumental and I took them to heart. Right? When I came out, right before I went to the military, my girlfriend was pregnant. She aborted the pregnancy because I wasn't there. It wasn't until I was at the parole board where I had to understand what was the connection. The emotional connection, the behavioral connection, and my reliance on more drugs, more sex, more crime, more of everything. But internally, I'm still just crumbling. I'm still crumbling. I might play like I'm okay. My second child came out the military, thought everything was nice. And actually, that probably was the most traumatic for me because in prison, I learned I contributed to that. My girlfriend Heidi, we going to a shopping center in my neighborhood. A couple of my gang friends, they beating up some girl in the middle of the street. I said, yeah, baby, go get out and help them. She got kicked in the stomach. Lost my child. The same day, and only because I knew, because my mom is a OBGYN midwife, and she told me. So learning all these things in prison, like, damn. But that was in prison. So the third one, now all these things are happening, and my only coping mechanism was drink, smoke, act out. So that, my course of addiction, weed, methamphetamine, cocaine, Sherman, all these drugs, they got all type of chemicals. So I'm not handling anything well. I wasn't even a good gang member. You know what I mean? So when it comes to addiction and the consequences of addiction, I couldn't make a rational choice even if I wanted to. So that was very, even dealing with it now, because I didn't have to go through that. Came from a good home, good education. Parents try to make the best way. That's why I say everything comes down to choice. Because I was foregone in my addiction that by the time I got out the military, I was worse. Because I'm a soldier with my military training. I'm more callous because the military makes you callous. I was already callous being a gang member. So the addiction became worse. I remember in Calipatria State Prison, I went to AA. I was in AA for 12 years. First couple of years, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not an addict. Because I didn't relate to the blackouts. Everything that was associated with alcoholism, the blackouts, et cetera, quick to know, you're like, I'm not an alcoholic, I just drink. Never weighing out, okay, how much were your losses while you were in your addiction? What was your thinking? What was all these things? And they were all losses, So leading up to my crime, I was an addict probably of everything, thrill seeking, ultimately taking a life just because I couldn't handle my own shit. So going up to the date that happened, And my girlfriend told me she lost a child. I contemplated suicide 2 days later. Sat on my bed, naked with a gun. My thing was, okay, just blow your head, blow everything away. A picture of my mom came to my face. I shot 2 rounds into the wall and just left. 3 days later is when the crime happened. I'm chilling with my gang friends, thinking everything is all right, but inside I'm pretty much imploding. Lifestyle of a gang member is an opportunist. It was the 15, everybody get their, they call them government checks, it's like the UC payments here. And it's a liquor store right here. Where we hung out was a laundromat. So the only thing I was thinking about, just get high, let's just smoke, so you won't feel anymore. I'm a bunch of feelings. So the first crime I actually did, she said she didn't have any money. Because naturally, I'm not a criminal, but I became a criminal via a gang member, right? So she said she didn't have any money. So I didn't get what I wanted. I was still with the friends, I acting like everything's okay, but everything wasn't, because I didn't get my fix to deal with what I was dealing with. And I learned that when I learned about denial. A criminal, they are going to go through whatever they think until they get it, and it doesn't have to be rational. So I went home that night, put on a hat, and my grandmother said, don't go out there. Because something either looked a certain type of way, but she said, don't go out there, and that's the last time she seen me.
It's like she knew.
Yeah. She sang something.
Maybe she did know. And not necessarily in like this spooky, psychic way, but, grandparents, they know shit, don't they? They've seen shit as well. They're going to see things in yourself that they've seen in other people before.
Yeah, desperation is a bitch, man.
Exactly. Going back to where we are now, what does having freedom mean to you now after such a long time with so many restrictions?
Might be a paradox, but freedom is, for me, can't be actually free like that. Not free in the world sense, because in the world sense, it won't be good for me. Freedom for me means being able to make the right choice, put the right plans in effect that'll have the best outcome. That's freedom for me, being able to just go outside when I want to go get some ice cream, or if I'm in a situation to where I need money, before I just go rob. Being free now, being free to exercise and use the education I got while in prison and experience and go out there and get it. That's what freedom allows. Yeah. The same successes I was having in prison, being free in the world just gives me a bigger platform with bigger tools to use, bigger stress, of course. But that's what freedom means to me, everything that I couldn't do.
Is there a place where you visit where you feel like you're most free? I understand that you went to the beach this weekend. Like, after being in cells and things for so long, what's it like being in such an open place? Or is there anywhere else specifically where you do feel you are at your most, again, I'm going to use the word free, do you know?
I do my music.
Yeah? So it's like a mental freedom.
Yeah.
Because do you not have like access to things like music and stuff within prisons?
Yeah. Got phones, they have tablets, they have, you can buy CDs. But this is a different environment. You have everything else to worry about.
Yeah.
But me, it's always been my safe place, because I grew up in it since my dad was a DJ. My dad owned a club. I was a musician. I played in a band. One of the best gifts that God ever gave me. But all I did was use that on the street to get girls and dumb shit.
I like the answer to that, because I think one of the things that I heard before was the biggest prison is the prison of the mind. And it's interesting, after 31 years of being in an actual prison, when I've asked you a question about freedom, you've still gone to something that is a mental state of freedom in music. I think that's a really interesting answer after such a long time there as well. Like, I thought you was going to say somewhere like being at a beach or something like that, but no, that's a completely different to what I'd expect.
No, because I had all of that before. All those things, going out and going for a walk and all that, I gave that up.
Yeah.
I gave that up. Freedom for me is actually thinking for myself. Actually going out and being a man, or learning what a man is and doing it. That's freedom for me.
Thank you.
Freedom to say no sometimes.
Yeah.
And in prison, you can't really say no. So freedom is to be like, no.
Yeah, that's it. No, like simple,
like, no.
and with no explanation or necessary. Just the answer is no, and that is all it needs to be. Andre, I'm just going to finish with a set of 10 questions that I ask all our guests before we wrap this up. And
do I get money at the end? Is this a big?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how it works.
Cool.
What is your favourite word?
Thank you.
Least favourite word?
No.
Tell me something that excites you.
Music.
Tell me something that doesn't excite you.
Conflict.
What sound or noise do you love?
Nature.
What sound or noise do you hate?
A woman crying.
What's your favourite swear word?
Fuck off. Which I only found out.
No, that's fine. What profession would you like to attempt?
What profession would I like to attempt? Corporate CEO.
What profession would you not like to do?
9 to 5.
And then lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Andre, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the Believe in People podcast. Cheers, mate. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, please check out the other episodes and hit that subscribe button. We're on Apple Music and Spotify, so please like and subscribe to be notified about our new episodes. You can also search for the Believe in People podcast on your favourite listening device, and if you can leave us a review, that will really help us in getting our message out there and rising up the daily podcast charts.